Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Father Jeff.
Morning is broken. And all of you, good morning.
Good morning. Morning has broken.
Morning has broken.
The rains poured down yesterday.
Rain. We needed the rain. It was so dry and windy. Whew.
I was worried about my lawn.
Why were you worried about your... Oh, because it was dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I complain about mowing, but then...
You complain about everything.
That's just the human nature, I think, is we love complaining.
Misery loves company.
It's too cold, it's too hot. It's never just right.
Nah. Everybody wants to be Goldilocks.
Just right.
Just right. Yeah. No, it's a Good Friday. Not Good Friday, but related to Good Friday.
But it's a solemnity, though.
But it's a solemnity, so today...
We don't have to fast today.
You don't have to do any penance today. In fact, it is not a day of penance.
And I was just reading something about Fridays being a day of penance.
But not today.
So my whole world is just...
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, Solemnity of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Always the second Friday after Pentecost. So... The way we do things in the United States, it's always follows the Feast of Corpus Christi, which is the second Sunday after Pentecost. So, yeah, so we had Corpus Christi back there on Sunday. We've got Sacred Heart today, followed by the Immaculate Heart of Mary tomorrow.
And Sacred Heart is always June 19th?
No.
No, we just described. You said it's after the second
So because
Sunday.
Easter moves around, Pentecost is going to move around, so that second Sunday... after Pentecost on the Friday, so it
all goes
somewhere
back to
in June.
To that moon.
It goes back to the moon. It goes back to the vernal equinox.
Vernal equinox.
Back to that vernal equinox and the full moon and all that good stuff. So today is the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a relatively newer devotion, but one that has ancient roots. I mean, the Sacred Heart was recognized. The heart of Jesus was spoken about and written about by the Church Fathers, especially the piercing of the heart and the flowing forth of blood and water and all of that stuff. But this was really a 17th century.
Between 1673 and 1675.
It's kind of in the Enlightenment. It was an Enlightenment era, and I know we've spoken about that before, where the world really embraced the scientific method, which is a good thing. Scientific method is a good thing. But in so doing, poo-poos faith and religion. Like, well, you can't know anything by faith. You can't know anything by religion. It's all got to be by science. If it doesn't fit in a test tube, it's not real. And that was, a pulling away from that religious faith, belief, God is far away and distant. And St. Margaret Mary Alacoque has this vision of our Lord speaking to her and presenting his heart. Look at my love. Look at how close I am. And so today is that feast day.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is also, not only is it a day of celebration, which means it is not a day of penance, but there is a plenary indulgence offered today for the faithful who publicly make the act of reparation to the Sacred Heart for offenses committed against it, against the love of God. So at the conclusion of daily Mass today, we will offer that prayer before the tabernacle. So all of those participating here and those participating in the live stream have access to that.
Excellent. Indulgence.
My brain is not on today.
Plenary
What
indulgence.
the heck? I ran out of scones. I don't have any more scones to eat.
Which reminds me,
Susan, where are the scones?
Susan Schrader, if you are listening, if we could get that oatmeal, blueberry, pecan, oat thing.
Toasted oatmeal recipe?
My wife really loved it. Gemma really loved it.
Really?
And the scones recipe, I mean, if you just want to give the recipe...
Or you could just bring a weekly breakfast to the office.
Or if you want to give the pineapple recipe, just the whole thing. We just need all the recipes.
That was delicious.
It was so good.
Is there any more blueberry stuff left?
I don't know. Because, intermittent fasting, I think Diane put some out yesterday, but intermittent fasting, I was just like, nope.
You're not eating.
I'm not even going to look at it because then I will be tempted.
And then you were yelling at me for eating the last scone.
Yeah.
You weren't going to eat it anyway. You were in a fast.
I was going to eat it in the afternoon.
Oh, that's why you take it and put it on your desk.
The last I looked at the scones, there was like
flag
7
on it.
There were 7 scones.
I don't know what happened to them all. I think someone packed them up and took them home.
I just heard Jackie laughing, so it was probably
Jackie
her.
must have taken them. She absconded with the scones. She absconded with the scones. My brain is back. Look at that. We're working today.
Yeah, it's back. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think it's another civil celebration as well today.
Yes.
Today is kind of colloquially
It's not
known as Juneteenth.
Yes.
June 19th, 1865. The last state I heard proclaimed in its boundaries the Emancipation Proclamation that had been issued by President Abraham Lincoln, freeing the slaves
So it's
after
2.5
the Civil
years
War.
later.
Isn't that crazy?
That's they didn't have internet. And
There wasn't
YouTube.
internet,
They
yeah, I
couldn't
know.
just say, hey, this is the thing.
And
So it's-
let's just point out, the last state to accept this? Texas.
Texas, God bless the greatest state.
Always
Maybe not in this situation.
doing its own thing. Why does it not surprise me that it was the most hard-headed? Anyway, you're going to read us something.
I am?
Yeah, weren't you? You were looking something up.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know-
it's just the General Gordon Granger of the Union showed up on Galveston, which I think at that point was still
It was the main.
capital.
It was, yeah, because Houston was swampland.
There's a huge flood in Galveston in 1900, so just about 35 years later. Maybe because they were the last state to do this. And all the people moved a little bit north to Houston, away from the shore.
Right.
But was I going to read the...
You weren't going to... I don't know what you're going to read. You were looking
There's a-
something up. So I
There's
was
12
just like,
promises if you have a devotion to the Sacred Heart, but you can look them up if someone wants to post them. I don't want
Right.
to take up precious showtime to
Precious
read these 12
Showtime.
things.
Yeah, we've
because
already moved past that, Jonathan.
we've moved past it, and some of the stuff just takes a little bit of explanation, or just like, what does that
Right.
actually mean?
Right. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of when our Lord promises things. I'm just gonna say, because most people, it's too frequent that people will latch on to that in a very superstitious fashion. And it's like, oh my gosh, if I do X, then Y is going to happen, and it moves into the heresy of Jansenism, or
Yeah.
that if I do something, then I merit something else. That it's not just free grace.
Right.
And so basically, those promises that are issued in the devotion of the Sacred Heart are the promises that God always issues to His faithful people.
Right, and because it's so much, it's like, oh, I checked all the marks off.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what else I do in my life.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of the
It's kind of like the promises attached to the scapular. If I wear my scapular, I'll never go to hell. Well, that's not quite the way it works.
I robbed a few banks, murdered a few people.
But I had my scapular on.
I don't really believe in Jesus, but just in case, I got the scapular.
I got the ticket.
Yeah, that doesn't work that way.
No, they're beautiful promises. They're good to read. And I think there is some truth embedded in them. Of course, there's truth embedded in them. But they really are promised to those who approach them in faith and love.
If it's great encouragement, I think.
Right.
Saying, oh, I have this devotion and I desire these things. That's wonderful. Let me live my life so as to attain these things.
Yeah.
And not just, I love the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I don't really go to Mass on Sundays, but
Right.
I love that Sacred Heart. Look at the Sacred Heart. It's so loving and merciful. I need all the mercy because I don't live my life. Yeah, no, It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't quite work that way. But what a beautiful intermix of these two. This our religious feast of the Sacred Heart, and even this the civil reckoning of the Emancipation Proclamation finally freeing the last slaves in captivity in America.
Yeah.
That those two things really, in some sense, come together for us as people of faith, because Jesus is ultimately the great liberator. He is the one that frees us. And I think that's where we left off. Transition. How could this be more perfectly set up? I think that's where we left off in our Dies Domini. In fact, I want to read to you, it's almost as if it was written for today. On this day, live streaming the morning show, I am sure John Paul II had this in mind.
Divine providence.
When he was writing this. The Passover of Christ has in fact liberated man from a slavery more radical than any weighing upon an oppressed people. The slavery of sin, which alienates man from God and alienates man from himself and from others, constantly sowing within history the seeds of evil and violence. and that it's Christ himself who liberates us from that terrible, terrible slavery. That the slavery to sin is the worst kind of slavery that a human being can impose, because we impose it upon ourselves.
Right.
It's not a slavery imposed upon another. It is something we do to ourselves, thinking that we will be free,
and we have
yet
control
we are not.
over it. We have control.
We have control. That's how God makes us in his image and likeness. You get to choose this. And we choose sin over and over and over again, and put ourselves in those bonds, in those shackles.
Like I said earlier today, Father Jeff, people are stupid. And that means me too.
I concur with that. People are stupid. and yet, God loves us. Man, I think that's why Jesus so often used the images of sheep. Because apparently sheep are very stupid.
Like they're not, I mean, I've never seen anyone talk about a smart sheep.
I don't talk to many people about sheep. When I was teaching up in Hardington, I had some kids whose families raised sheep. And they would talk about kind of, I mentioned this, and they say, oh, yeah, they're kind of dumb. Because, if you don't, you got to move them. They just don't know any better. It's like you have to show them, lead them right to the place to eat, or the place to drink, or the place to go find shelter. Otherwise, they're just going to stand out there and die. I don't know. Apparently, sheep are really dumb.
Well, I mean, it's not far off from humans.
So I think that's why Jesus used just to show us that he is this good shepherd, but also to say, notice the sheep I'm talking about. That's all you people. Kind of dum-dums.
Well, I will probably sin either today or definitely in the next week in some form. And it'll be my choice.
And it'll be your choice, Jonathan.
So call me a dum-dum.
I'm going to try not to sin. That's going to be my choice.
You try that. I'm going to try not to sin too. But then something stupid will happen and I'll do something stupid.
Something stupid always happens. Paragraph 64 is noted as a day of rest. And then, you know what struck me when I was reading this one, Jonathan? That in order for this to be a day of Christians, it is not normal that Sunday, the day of joyful celebration, should not also be a day of rest. And it is difficult for a Christian to keep Sunday holy if they do not have enough free time. That jumped out at me because the light bulb went on and it was like, wait a minute, holiness almost demands free time. That in order to be holy or to keep something holy, you have to have free time. That it was worked into the law. Even God works that into the Ten Commandments when he gives that to the Israelite people. And it's just part of the rhythm that if we don't have free time, we don't have holiness.
So that can still be scheduled free time though, right? So
what do you mean?
Well, because I think of if I have scheduled time, I have a scheduled time to pray, is that free time?
Yes.
So
because prayer is wasting time. I mean, prayer is, I've heard it described as wasting time with Jesus. That I'm just going to go waste time with Jesus, and that's going to be... So, yeah, you can schedule that. In fact, oftentimes, we need to schedule free time. Because otherwise, everything else encroaches. And what we have to do... I was just talking to someone else the other day about this, is that we have to create boundaries. And without boundaries, if you don't build the dam or the levee, the water is going to just, flood into that. If you don't put up the fence, the wild critters are going to come running into that, or the others they're going to run away. So the boundaries help define things. And we've got the chaos of the world coming at us and closing upon us, and unless we create some kind of wall, fence, boundary, whatever, it's far too easy to lose that. So, yeah, I think exactly. In order to have space, you have to put up walls.
I think you almost have to schedule it. As off as that sounds, that if you don't intentionally make that free time, you will fill up with other things.
Something else. And if you don't do it, something else is going to come in.
Because there's always something you can do. I talked about how I made that raised flower bed.
Yeah.
Have I touched it since we initially put it up? No, because there's all been other things happening. And Genevieve's watching right now, so she knows. She
knows.
wants me to get it done.
She knows her slacker husband is sitting over there.
If only I'd been slacking, there's just other things that come up. And so it's just, you have to schedule things.
Yeah. And if we don't, not only does something else come in to take that, but then that also becomes the playground of sin. Ironically, there's that old saying, an idle hands or an idle mind is the devil's workshop. And so rest and freedom doesn't necessarily mean just doing nothing, but creating the space of emptiness, creating conscious emptiness, conscious freedom, keeps that out of there. I learned this in the classroom as a teacher, that the most successful teachers in terms of discipline were those that had clear guidelines and that you saw when a student crossed that line. Whatever that was, that when students knew where the boundaries were, then they had all of this freedom to run around within those boundaries. No matter how big or small they were,
Sure.
They knew what their freedom was, and they could run around in that space. Without those boundaries, there's this, I need to know where the boundaries are, so we're going to limit test, and we're going to push, and we're going to do all kinds of things to find out where the boundaries are.
I think you crossed a boundary.
I did cross a boundary.
No social distancing.
Yeah, that's right. But that's what happens in the classroom, and it's what happens in our life. Without boundaries, we push the limits, and it gets us into trouble.
Well, it's like rules in sports. If one person has to dribble and the other person decides they're not going to dribble, that's not going to make for a very fun game.
The game all of a sudden devolves into chaos.
Yes.
The rules of the road, you name it. Without these boundaries, you just can't have communal life.
No.
And so we can't have life with God either if we don't build some boundaries.
Boundaries are so healthy in every aspect of life. You need to be able to say no to people.
Yeah.
You need to be able to be available to say yes when opportunities come.
Yes.
If your whole week is scheduled and there is no flexibility, anyone that's had a whole week that's scheduled with no flexibility, something inevitably will go wrong, and it throws everything else off.
Everything is affected. So have some boundaries. Put up some walls. Good fences make good neighbors, Jonathan.
Well, I think it's about time we get
Tomorrow,
a wall here.
I was gonna say next time you see us, we're not gonna be able to see each other because we are going to have a big old wall between us, and we're gonna rejoice in our freedom.
Amen.
Oh my goodness. So let's move on to paragraph 65. What did you notice in there, Jonathan, that you want to share? Nothing. You didn't read it yet, did you?
I have one thing underlined.
What'd you underline?
The alternation between work and rest, built into human nature, is willed by God Himself, as appears in the creation story in the book of Genesis, which you've touched on.
Yeah.
But to think of it as that there is work and rest, and that God wills us to work and rest not being a couch potato.
Right.
Like, that freedom of doing nothing does not mean being a couch potato, but it just means being free.
Being free.
To do something.
Yeah. You're free to work, and you're free to enjoy the fruits of those labors. That's what if you don't have the freedom to enjoy the fruit of labor, then labor becomes toil. But when we're able to enjoy, and that's why slavery is so pernicious, because a slave only toils and does not get to enjoy the fruit of the labor. Someone else enjoys the fruit of that labor. And when Jesus comes to free us, we now work and we get to enjoy. We become sons with Him. I no longer call you slaves, He says.
Yes.
For a slave does not know what the master is doing. They just toil. But we have been created in the image and likeness of God. We get to work, which means we also get to participate in the fruits of that work. And without the freedom, you can't do that.
No.
So it reminds us that ultimately, even though God has given us the power to work with Him, to co-create, if we don't have time to rest, we may begin to think that it's all dependent upon us and that we are God.
And how many times have we felt that? That something is completely dependent on us.
If I stop, it's all going to fall apart.
Right.
If I'm not there, it's going to fail. If I don't do it,
the world moves on. It does. And it's something that it's a lie that we all buy into because we make ourselves to be gods of some sort. I'm going on vacation.
Yeah.
I have live streamed 95% of the things that we do here. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay, Jonathan. We can live without you.
That's the one thing that's tangible that you guys can see. But in so many things, it's like we put so much pressure on ourselves.
Yeah. You are not God. You are not the Savior. I'm not God. You are not God. You are not the Savior. And without that rest to give us that, okay, God is God. God is the creator, and I am just a co-creator with him. And I am a co-worker with him. And if we are able to take that step back, now rest is sacred, and it's not self-worship.
Very cool. Yeah. Something even maybe, well, not as cool because we're talking about that. But Patty Brower is from St. Charles Borromeo Parish in Meredith, New Hampshire.
Hey!
And she found us about 6 weeks ago.
And you've been enjoying the morning show.
Yeah.
Nice to have you with us, Patty. I love the way that there's so many communities that are coming together.
From sea to shining sea.
That we celebrate our faith across everywhere. This
is why you guys need to share this. Click that share button.
Click that share button. Another blessing that the horrible pandemic has brought us.
Yeah.
Another blessing, bringing people together, even though it attempts to tear people apart.
It does.
Love it. Okay, paragraph 66.
Yes.
This one really gets into something that I think a number of people find uncomfortable because it almost begins to dip into politics.
Yeah, and I love the conversation we had a little bit because you first posed the question, or said the maybe controversial thing of saying, sometimes people ask, should I go to the grocery store on Sundays?
Should I go shopping on a Sunday?
Go shopping, do anything, And I was just like, well, no, there's nothing. My initial thought, there's nothing. I would not consider you going shopping work. Then I thought about it in the 5 seconds because I tend to process pretty quickly.
Right.
And I was like, oh, you are forcing someone else to work on that holy day. And that's where it's coming from. It's not like if you go pick berries in your garden, no, you're completely fine. But if you're forcing someone else to go pick berries and be stationed there away from their family, away from their worship, is that okay?
Yeah, this is the question. People will ask me this all the time. Okay, so first of all, what are we talking about? Paragraph 66 is really talking about workers' rights. And this was really championed, I think, by Pope Leo XIII, especially in the age of industrialization, where workers were, work became easier, but at the same time it became harder with mechanization and the assembly line and all of the industrialization and all of these things. And Pope Leo XIII writes this wonderful encyclical, Rerum Novarum, which really speaks to economic justice, the rights of the working class, the laboring force, that again, we cannot treat people like slaves or as cogs in the wheel. That here's the mechanical process, and here are my flesh and blood parts of that machine. And you treat people like machines. And it was really a problem. Children's labor laws, even in the United States.
Well, he mentioned it's still even in some,
in some places.
In this country, we do have working laws and things like that with child labor, but you go to places in China and India where the just wages and everything else, it is.
Even in America,
and it is done here too.
Hidden in places where it's that there are almost indentured servitudes that are created, and the justice, economic justice, and paying a fair wage and a living wage, and all of those things are not guaranteed for everyone.
Right. It's less visible here.
It's less. Yeah.
But it's still there.
But it's still there. And when people don't have the right to work, then they also don't have the right to rest. Those two things really do go hand in hand, because if you can't work and support yourself, you're not going to be able to enjoy the fruits of labor. You're not going to be able to enter into a rest. You're going to be in a state of unease or whatever. So the right to work is there. The right to rest from that work is there. And so those two things have to go hand in hand. So what Pope Leo wrote about was that we really need to stand in solidarity with those people who are working, who do not experience justice, whose lives are made difficult by others. And this is what then raises that question that people will ask me as a priest. Father, I've heard other priests say that it's sinful for me to go shopping on Sunday. That especially if it's not shopping for necessities, like groceries, which you could say is necessary, essential services as we've begun calling them now. But that I go to the mall, I go to, the department store, I go, to the outlets, whatever. That's how I spend my Sunday in a consumerism. And in so doing, by consuming, I require someone to be on the other side of the counter who now must work in order for me to have leisure, which is spent in material consumption. And when you think about it in those terms, it doesn't sound as nice.
Yeah,
it sounds a little more dirty.
It is.
It's like there's a little bit of grime under the fingernails on that one. And I've always wrestled with this personally. I've never been one of those priests who come down really hard and say, if you go out to the store on a Sunday, that you are committing grave sin, or sin at all. I've never gone there. But what I would say is that if your habits and behaviors prevent others from their ability to rest and enjoy the Sabbath, the Lord's Day, then there's an issue there. And it's not a personal, and here's the thing, it's not a personal thing necessarily, but it's a societal thing.
Right.
Do I contribute to a system that enslaves or that forces whatever?
Yeah, because not my generation, so in previous generations, all those types of stores were closed.
Then, in a more Christian
Yeah, and then
setting.
Consumerism rose.
And Christian faith declines.
And so then there's like, oh no, everything's open on Sunday. And so now when I want Chick-fil-A, which happens to be on Sundays, I can't get Chick-fil-A, but I could get any other fast food restaurant I want.
You can't go to Chick-fil-A and you can't go to Hobby Lobby.
Right. Which are
closed on Sundays. Yeah, based. Very, very, yeah. That tends to be, right.
But anything else, back in the day, department stores were closed on Sundays, and everything was closed on Sundays, which that was that Christian society culture,
right?
Which was a beautiful thing, and I think it really, it would take a lot to get back to that point because of the world is so post-Christian,
right? But
it wouldn't take a lot to redirect our lives to that,
right? Or even. There was a policy even in the Archdiocese of Omaha here that Catholic schools were not permitted to schedule anything on a Sunday prior to 1 o'clock. That Sunday morning had to be left free so that people had the ability to attend to their worship. And so you gave them space to do that. And then in the afternoons, those things could open up, things could be going on.
Sure.
And so there is, again, it's finding a sort of balance thing, because maybe for some people, I don't know, the way their day, their week works or whatever, Sunday afternoons is the only time or the best time, especially if you've got a troop of kids or whatever, to make it to the grocery store. Mm-hmm. Because at least dad's home to stay or mom's home to stay, and the other one can run and go get the groceries while they're watching the kids. So that may be a Sunday afternoon. But maybe it's our responsibility to ensure that Sunday mornings are left free and that our leisure does not impose someone else's work. I don't know. I think this is still a conversation to be had. When you're talking about societal effects and societal sin, how does our personal decisions push those boundaries, and then
even just the family time. I mean, like I said, I tend to be a quick processor, but thinking of the devaluation of a family and people working on Sundays, so that means, especially for lower income people, because that's tend to be the people that work on weekends and on Sundays.
Sure.
If it's single parent households anyways, they're leaving to go work on Sundays, or even 2-parent households that just don't make as much, they aren't having that family time. And so much can be attributed to losing that time. One, in just post-Christian culture now that we're in.
Right.
It's so much as we've lost what the Lord's Day is. We've lost the Sabbath.
And when you start moving the boundaries, it becomes real easy, because if all of Sunday was reserved, it was like, okay, well, that's just it. And then only up until 1 o'clock is now, so the Sunday mornings are reserved. Well, that boundary got pushed, and it becomes easier to push it until it's gone. And so, you give an inch, a mile gets taken. Yeah. I mean, that's the adage, and that's really the case.
And unfortunately, when we talked about it a little bit earlier this week, now people reserve that 1 hour.
Yeah, and that's
it is 59 minutes and 59 seconds and a smidge.
Yeah.
And after that, boom, gone. There's no talking to other people, anything else. If your homily runs a little bit long,
I'm out of my time. I can't do an hour. What the heck?
That walk back from communion's the runway out to the world.
Yeah. Again, if we don't create the space, other things will take it. And so if we don't make the boundaries, I mean, how many club sports now have games Sunday mornings and all day Sundays, and then the tournaments, and you got to have like 50 different brackets, and for goodness sakes, these are kids games, and yet we have to have them make them so professional and whatnot that they will come in and take the time from us. And I listen to people and it's like, it doesn't even sound like you enjoy this. You value it, but you don't enjoy it. But it's this crazy thing that I just it's hard to understand.
Yeah, I heard a talk once just talking about like the valuation of those extracurricular activities for kids. Your kid is not going to be a professional musician, professional dancer, or a professional athlete.
More than likely.
The percentage of people that go on and can make a career out of those things is so minuscule. Yet we teach our kids to we are teaching our kids to prioritize that over Sunday Mass, over Sunday.
Over the things that are eternal.
Because yes, they might play through high school, maybe even through college, but I think it's 2% of college athletes become professionals in whatever they do.
Right.
And so, even if they're lucky enough to do that, their sports career will end. Maybe they can become a coach or something like that, which is great and fine, but you don't have to actually play to do it. Anyways, going to Mass is a preview of what the eternal is.
Absolutely.
That is the preview. And so we are practicing, when we go to Mass, we are practicing for heaven.
Set your walls up around that and protect it. We can maybe finish with paragraph 67, where John Paul writes that Christians will naturally strive to ensure that civil legislation respects their duty to keep Sunday holy. In any case, they are obliged in conscience to arrange their Sunday rest in a way which allows them to take part in the Eucharist, refraining from work and activities which are incompatible with the sanctification of the Lord's Day, its characteristic joy, and the necessary rest for spirit and body. So if the law does not enshrine that, then we ourselves must enshrine that. And that is an important thing, that we have to enshrine that I need, even if I do have to work on Sunday, I have to set aside time. And the law of the United States allows that. And I think a lot of people forget that your employer, unless it would cause severe hardship to the business, must give you time off to meet your religious obligations, whether that be Saturday evening or Sunday morning or whenever that might be, on a holy day of obligation. They must give you that time off if it does not cause damage to their business.
Right.
And so if there's other people that you can arrange a shift change or whatever, that you're protected in that. And so don't give that up and don't say, oh, I'm scheduled to work. No. when I was a 16-year-old kid, and I went to work at the grocery store for the first time. And in my interview process, I told the manager that, I'm involved in these high school things, and I need Sunday morning or Saturday evening to go to church, and that was non-negotiable when he was scheduling me. That was just the way it is. So, you can do this. It's not hard.
For sure.
Yeah.
And Karen Kneifel did say she has a former student who's a professional football player and a devout Christian. It takes time for prayer and service. Yes, it can be done. You just have to be so much more disciplined.
Yeah.
And so, undoubtedly, kids that are in extracurriculars in high school, especially with things like show choir and other things. Everything's happening. But you have to make sure that if it's going to the show choir competition and not going to Mass, or going to Mass, you have to choose what is more important. Mortal sin, reward of heaven. Now, if you can do both, and say, oh, well, we're going to have to wake up and go to a 7 a.m. Mass, so you can still do all your show choir stuff, awesome. It just takes more discipline, and it is more difficult.
Set that time.
But that is the first priority.
All right. You guys got your marching orders. This Sunday, build some walls. But build walls that create freedom.
Amen.
Isn't that an ironic statement? Build a wall that creates some freedom. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the feast day today.
Saturday Vigil Mass is at 6 p.m. this weekend.
Yeah, don't forget,
not at
6 p.m. because I'm giving a retreat in Schuyler, and I'm not going to make it back quite in time, so 6 p.m. Hopefully I'll be back. Don't start without me.